Good morning, everybody. It's really so wonderful to see everyone here. I'm really honored to be in this setting, this amazing setting. I think we all want to acknowledge our hosts as well for having us here. I'm also waving at all my MoCA family. And as I get started, I just wanted to say how moving it is to hear so many people speak both live and on the screen today about, can you hear, is it too close? Oh, they were waving at me because it was weird, not because they love me. I see. Now I understand. I thought they were just like excited, but no. Does it sound better now? Yeah, okay. It takes a stranger to tell you what to do. I was just going to say how important and wonderful, moving it was to hear the speakers before me talk about culture as essential and artists as essential workers. It's something I think many of us have thought about for a long time, and certainly within this context to reiterate that centrality of culture's importance feels really exciting. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm also going to say I think this is a conversation that could happen for 4 hours. I've been given 40 minutes, so please excuse the brevity, and I think everyone here will want to kind of speak at a high level and then take probably some questions as well. Again, I am Johanna Burton. I'm the Maurice Marciano Director at the Museum of Contemporary Art, MoCA, in Los Angeles. I've been on the job for about 5 months, and I've been really grateful to immediately jump into some of this work, which feels not only in line with the direction we should all be going, but with my own personal beliefs. So I'm very grateful to Louise and others for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you for joining our panel discussion today, Art for Hope, Responding to the Needs of Our Planet. I'm honored to be here and to join the Hope Forum, the participants, and the esteemed representatives from the UN in calling on all of us to take action at this pivotal moment when progress on sustainability is needed at an unprecedented speed and scale. The news about our planet's rapidly warming climate is incredibly alarming, and it's a heartbreaking and scary time, I think, for all of us. However, it is also a time of opportunity, of promise, and of action, when radical shifts in our thinking and practices can have a real and lasting impact. It's a time to move beyond despair to hope, and to metrics, and to seeing what we can do each day. I know many of us believe deeply that art can be a catalyst for change. As arts and cultural workers, we are not experts in this space. We meaning me. I do not claim to be an expert, but I'm learning each day. But that is what makes our work here distinctly valuable. We have opportunities to communicate the possibilities along with the dire realities, to advance creative strategies, and to inspire action and hope. And I was just speaking with somebody about how important the art world is as a kind of microcosm of the larger world. We can look at all we do in our sphere as a model for larger action. Importantly, the arts, this work that we all love, we gather together to be around, has resonance and meaning well beyond our field. It's interesting how we as individuals and institutions came to this issue and come to this issue. We are learning as we work. The metaphor, building the boat as you sail it, often comes to mind. And many of us are working to make changes in our everyday practices. I find myself aware of everything that I do in a new and important and vital way. Personally, I am so proud of and engaged with MoCA's participation in this space. I began my tenure as director of MoCA relatively recently, as I mentioned, and was fortunate to have the opportunity to now engage with our environmental council. It's an important project re-envisioning the museum's relationship with sustainability on a daily basis, and I passionately support that work. The Environmental Council at MoCA is the first of its kind for a major art museum in the United States and is focused on climate, conservation, and environmental justice in furtherance of the museum's overall mission, along with financial commitments and expertise to work towards environmentally focused museum quality exhibitions, related artist support, and reductions in emissions and consumption. Co-chaired by artist and activist Haley Mellon and MoCA Life trustee David Johnson, this thoughtful group of sustainability experts has focused the museum's work on climate conservation and environmental justice. I am cognizant that we have a long way to go and a tremendous amount to learn. It's never about just one institution, and our environmental work must be deeply collaborative to have any effect. It is part of our work and I believe our ethical responsibility to partner with other organizations and one another, to continually educate ourselves and share what we've learned, and of course to participate in events like this one as often as we can. Although all of us coming together in Venice has created its own, we've contributed to the problem as well, so it's also important to note. Today's panel brings together such an incredible group of people to highlight our urgent global crisis and art's place in addressing the future. I'm going to only briefly introduce each of these amazing speakers so we can jump right in from hearing from them. Renowned as one of the most important artists of his generation, Tino Sehgal's critical acclaim derives from his radical artistic practice that takes the form of constructed situations, live encounters between visitors and those enacting the work. Emerging from personal relationships and fortuitous encounters, world-renowned artist Danh Vo's projects take their final form as objects and images that have accrued shifting layers of meaning in the world, whether through their former ownership, their proximity to specific events, or their currency as universal icons. Lucia Pietroiusti, how do you say your last name, please?
Pietroiusti.
Okay.
It's okay.
Lucia, I want to get it right. Is a curator working at the intersection of art, ecology, and systems, usually outside of the gallery format. She is the founder of the General Ecology Project at Serpentine, London, a strategic cross-organizational effort dedicated to the implementation of ecological principles throughout the gallery's public-facing programs, internal infrastructure, and networks. And finally, right to my immediate right is Heath Lowndes, managing director and co-founder of the Gallery Climate Coalition, GCC, of which we are a part, and it's an extraordinary institution. It's an international charity and membership organization founded by a group of gallerists, journalists, fair organizers, and others that provides sector-specific resources and guidelines for environmental sustainability. The GCC is truly providing global support by inaugurating chapters in a range of countries. So with that, I'm going to turn right to the first question. And I also just want to thank you again for joining us. So as I said, we don't have a great deal of time, so I'm going to actually, what I normally don't do, I'm going to group the artists, and then I'm going to group the cultural workers who are working in institutions. So Jan and Tino, and you don't have to try to coordinate your answer. You can argue if you wish. Why is art vital in this current moment, and what are you doing for sustainability and advocacy? Little question.
Tino.
No. I'm going to talk too long.
You start, then you start.
Yeah, but I think how long do we have?
I will.
How much? Because I guess it's the second or third panel that Lucia and me are together on this topic, so I have so many sound bites, so you have to stop me. Are you sure you want to let me go first?
Of course.
You know, I'm one of these men, they start talking and don't stop.
I've experienced many of them in my life.
Yeah, so, okay. You want me to talk? Okay, so let me... Yeah, so I'll talk and then you stop me.
I will stop you.
And you stop me too. You're the one, okay?
I'll really stop you.
Okay, so because I came to art because I thought that, like, I was interested in the sustainability problem, not in art, so that's why I feel very strongly about these things. And I was like, what can I change my habit, you know? But like, what is the problem in one sentence? Can you hear me? Because I'm a theater director by training. Can you hear me? Or you want the microphone? What?
I carried more than you did, so...
I should carry more than... That's like better? I want to follow her example. Yeah. So, I grew up in a very industrial town. Let's be very quick, because we don't have to... And then I was like, everybody has this habit of producing things. Producing things produce carbon dioxide. So I'm going to try and break the habit of producing things and put it to dance. That was my starting point for my work. And so I was actually not interested in culture. I was just trying to break my own habit. And what is the problem today? The problem is that every action in industrialized societies produces carbon dioxide. But we have 7 billion people in the world, and we couldn't feed them without industrialized societies, correct? So it's a problem. It's not easy to solve. That's why we're sitting here since the 80s. And the first thing I want to bring to you is just breaking the habit. Because we always play games. Any routine, anything we follow is something that starts, as a point by German sociologist Gerhard Schulze, the game starts playing us. First we play the game, then the game plays us, like relationships are a prime example, I'm sure you all know. And then, so now we're playing the conference game, and like you said, some people are speaking, some people are listening, we all came here. For now, we haven't really done anything for CO2. So at least let's try practicing breaking the habit of playing the conference game. Yeah. So I want you to just do, because the conference game is also, we're active, you're passive, you are a brain, we are a mouse, you know, and a brain. So let's try to reconnect with our bodies a little bit. Not to connect with our bodies, but to break the habit of doing what we always do. Because this is my opinion, I'm working on this problem since 35 years. This is the biggest problem. Habits control us. But when you break the habit, it's very difficult, but it's actually fun. So, when you look at your fingers, yeah? Sorry, I'm doing this so quick. Like, did you ever look at your fingers? They're quite beautiful, weird, complex entities. Yeah? So now you can shake them a little bit, yeah? And you can move them in different directions. Lucia has done this before. Yeah? You can see how it goes, and then let's do both things together. So can you move them quickly, shake them. Yeah? And now you do the two things together. This is a little thing for you today. So you like I'll show you one, you go 1, 2. It's not so easy as it looks. 1, 2, yeah? So this breaking the habit of a certain game, I think this is the biggest part of the problem, and you might need artists for that. Don't use us as graphic designers. I'm very emotional about this. I heard this 3 times from the UN. The artwork is not going to be the graphic designer for your solutions. Like, we need to come together to find solutions together, creative solutions, because we're all in the habit of doing things together. That's why Heath proposes, you know, like taking the train to Basel, doing a conference. These are small things, but they're very important, you know. So don't, because otherwise we come to the quantum physicists and ask if you can do our text because you know about maths. No? Sorry to be direct. So do I have a second point?
You have one more point.
Okay, one more point. So the second point is hope. Hope is great, but it's not good to romanticize hope. Yeah? Like, I think hope starts when you have a problem and you're feeling bad, and you start to acknowledge how you're part of the problem, and then you acknowledge, that's the hardest part, to acknowledge that you're part of the problem. And that's not easy to look at, because you don't want to be part of the problem, because you didn't decide to be part of the problem. It's not your intention, but you are part of the problem. Then when you acknowledge that, then you have hope, because you have a more realistic approach. So this idea of the power of art, like art is the part of the problem. And I'll try to explain to you quickly why. Because since the Enlightenment, we have this idea of like separating the whole of life into different departments. Like the art departments, the science departments, the medicine department, the government department, the finance department. So this was very efficient idea. I mean, we are a high culture. There's been many high cultures on this planet, but this was a great idea. So we had like great discoveries in medicine, we had abstract art in art, and we had like William Forsythe in dance, and we had like quantum physics in natural science, all things we didn't have in indigenous cultures or high cultures or other things, you know. So we made a good, in-depth progress, if you want. Yeah? But the problem is that now we come to a problem which is so all-encompassing that we can't really connect the dots again of these different disciplines. You know, we all speak different languages. The UN people think we are graphic designers. We don't even know them, you know. And the quantum physicists don't know how to even tell us what they're doing, and we don't understand it. So we've all gone so deep that we don't know anymore how to communicate when we're so deep in our different sectors, you know. So I think what art is part of the problem in the sense that we are very separated sector. What I want to introduce, and then I'll stop, is this idea of the whole of life. The whole of life has different activities. You eat, you draw maybe, you dance in a party, you do your finances, you go and meet somebody, you take a political decision. That's the whole of life. And we need to come back to this idea more of the whole of life and thinking of this whole of life. This is the practice we have lost. That's why we have trouble solving this problem, which is the whole of life. And that's why art is a very disciplinary field. It's like quantum physics, you know? Like, it's difficult to understand Pierre or Danh Vo. It's not so easy to understand. It's like, I don't understand quantum physics, you know? And the idea of art is a very simplistic one, but we have to, I think, like the idea that art is half of art is simplistic, but art is also a very segregated field. And I think we have to come to more like practices where we think of the whole of life, we start communicating again, and we have to acknowledge that art is part of the problem. Art is a segregated field which looks and celebrates objects, material things, transforms objects. That is the core problem. You cannot just say the power of art and like everything is great and then everybody goes and does a cup. You know, like, and so I think if we come back to this idea of the whole of everything, and we also acknowledge that art is a celebration of material culture, of industrial production. The first exhibitions you would see natural resources next to new machines, next to artworks. The Crystal Palace exhibition is all of that together. It's part of this industrial transforming the earth into things emitting carbon dioxide. So you cannot just say like, it's all great, you know. But we can maybe go away from contemporary art and I'll stop and come to more an idea of contemporary creativity together. Sorry, I always look at you.
Thank you.
No, I think that's a perfect, starting point for me, because what Art 2030 really contributed to in my life was to introduce me for people in other fields, and that was the first time that I just engaged with things outside of art, because I've been so over-professionalized. And one of the great minds that Louise introduced me for was Carsten Rabeck, a scientist. And he kept on telling me that, I should engage. And I told him, Carsten, I am the worst. I fly like a pig. I ship gigantic exhibitions all over the world. What should I say? But he gave me a very good advice. He told me it doesn't matter, nature will survive. And that gave me a very good starting point to think. And I actually, a month ago, had a meeting with him where I told him, 3 years ago, I couldn't be public with these matter, but I may be ready, So here I am, I guess. And I think what I can do as an artist is to use the experience I have, which is has been throughout my career critical against desires, because they are brought up, and this is what we're against, because we have very strong forces in the world that controls and direct desires. And I could keep on talking about these kind of things, but I think that you have to go deep into yourself and try to understand what all these kind of things mean, And I went so far to think that maybe I don't even want to be reincarnated, And that's where we should start from, I think.
Should we talk a little bit more with you? I was going to ask you if you think about your work in a way, though it is object-based, as recycling, in some sense.
Yeah, but that came not by thinking that I should save the world, That came from other thinkings. But of course, today I think a lot, but I did that throughout many years, that I think I have produced enough in my life, And where do we start from there? And it's questions about, do we need to do so many, you should reduce yourself, And I can talk so shortly about that. I weirdly started to have a studio after many years not having any studios, and it ended up being a garden instead. And I think like, why would I produce something in one place and bring it to another place? I actually never did that before. I usually did it on site. Of course, I flew something weird in, and then I had to do something with it. But now I just do it in a little bit outside of Berlin. And these are the thinkings that are interesting to develop, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you. So now I'm going to do the dual question for the two of you, which actually really nicely, I think, links up to some of the themes that you two have pulled out, rethinking habits and also thinking outside of the immediate sphere, which is so small that we all operate in. So both of you, I think, prioritize connectivity and networks and systems that are larger and bigger according to need. So the question is, partnerships and new models are crucial to spur action. How are different parts of the art sector engaging their networks within the sector, but then I think following some of what was just said, outside the sector importantly as well. So either of you, if you could take that, would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just on the point about new models, new ways of working, I think in order to create new ways of working, you first need to identify the issues with the current system, and particularly the environmental issues with the current system, the art world. And the only way we can do that effectively is by conducting carbon reports and waste audit. Measuring is such an important part of this conversation. Without measuring, you won't know what you are responsible for. And once you have the data on that, then you can really clearly see where the issues lie and what changes need to be made. And I think after that, there's endless possibilities of exciting ways that we can transition our operation. But we have to start with the most urgent, direct sources of emission, which in the art world is moving objects, mostly by airplane, moving people, again, mostly by airplane, and grid energy consumption, which in the art world is mostly heating and ventilation systems. But beyond that, there is so much more to the art world that we need to address that is maybe less directly associated with emission. I think we need to creatively think about how we interact with art in every way, from the production of it to how we program and create exhibitions and collect art and conserve it and commission it. I think all of these actions need to be rethought through the lens of sustainability. And we are at this transition moment, and I think that gives us a really exciting opportunity to write the rules again. And I think that opens up a lot of questions about how the art world can operate and maybe better models for the art market to operate. And I think we've got to make the most of this opportunity. I think GCC is very focused on the practical steps to get to decarbonization in the very short term. But once we get to 2030, which isn't that far away, if we do reach our targets, that's not going to be job done, problem solved. There's going to be so much more that needs to happen. And we also need to think about all the other interconnected issues. As we heard in the introduction talk, there's social issues here and issues of equality and diversity that are totally interconnected with this conversation. And I think there's big conversations about radical systems changes and structure rethinking that needs to happen now. We don't have the answers to them, but we need to have them on our lips as we're going through this transition.
What you just said is interesting too, where I think often we're stuck in a way of working where we're trying to amend an existing structure instead of building a new one, or even getting one's head around what that looks like in terms of things like art world economics and the kind of fundamentals. Do you, you just alluded to larger kind of structural rethinking. Are you working on that at GCC?
Yeah, we're a really small team, so we've got our work cut out trying to get people to calculate their emissions and decarbonize.
Yeah.
But I think, we're fairly confident that if with a bit of effort, everyone in the sector can tighten up their operations so that they can be more efficient, less impactful, less damaging, and reach that 50% reduction. But that's changing little bits of the current system. We need to really rethink how the whole structure operates.
Amazing. Before I turn it over to Lucia, will you just very briefly, for folks who don't know, explain what GCC is as a structure?
Yeah, so GCC is an environmental charity and a membership organization, and we provide sustainability guidelines to the visual art sector. Our primary target is the 50% reduction by 2030, in line with the Paris reaching that target is to align an international network of members to the same standardized information and actionable guidelines. The idea being that if everyone in our professional community is speaking the same ecological language and supporting each other, then that transition to low impact operations would be much faster and much more efficient. We have 800 members around the world that consist of artists and institutions, individual professionals, businesses, as well as galleries. So we're open to everyone, and yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Lucia, will you, as you jump into this question, also explain a little bit about general ecology at the Serpentine, and then maybe, again, get into kind of questions of networks and coordination and partnerships?
Absolutely. I might not start from there, but I might, at some point, I might get there, hopefully. So I think something that was really interesting that struck me about what you said just now is changing habits. And I think I would probably say that I'm in the business of changing habits of mind rather than habits of practice. And at the risk of saying quite a few of the same things that Tino, we should make like a double act from now, that you've said, but just slightly differently. I would sort of remind us that if we have any experience of living with children, the way that they wake up in the morning, the assumptions that they make about the shape in which the world is that morning depends on the shape in which the world has been presented to them up to that point. So if they're 2 years old, everything that you've shown them is what they think exists. So much so that the wonderful, and I was so humbled and lucky to be part of working on this, but the wonderful Lithuanian pavilion that was presented in 2019, I'm looking directly at one of the three artists, Lina Lapelita, it entered my son's life. It was a piece that in many ways addressed the kind of cognitive incapability of conceiving of the scale of climate breakdown, particularly for those people who are not at the front lines of climate breakdown, right? Because those are very different experiences. My son was 1.5 when he happened upon that beach, which was an indoor artificial beach in which everybody sings. And from that point on, he's 5 now. He still believes there are two kinds of beaches. One of them that you go to where people don't sing, and one of them that you go to where people sing. And there is no sort of more clear example of how we actually reshape the world into the shape in which we believe it is. And we do that every day, and we do that with our habits all of the time. So what are the habits of mind, that culture? And of course, before it was not even just before, but before and around and beyond it, the art field being this very specialized, very segregated, very self-segregating, very elitist kind of field that celebrates material culture and post-industrial kind of, pseudo-success. Before and around all of that, culture is ultimately one of the most resilient technologies that as a species we've ever actually managed to come up with. If you think about media obsolescence, you're aware of media obsolescence. At some point, your computer will no longer read your floppy disks. Paper will burn and melt in various ways. Memory, oral traditions, narrative histories, memory, cultural forms endure through a much larger period of time on average. And so if we're thinking about the most resilient technology we've ever made as a species, we can be fairly certain that culture has been the means through which we have remembered how to artificially fertilize the date palm, which has sustained Mesopotamian civilizations for millennia, how we sort of have, and has often been about the weather, because the weather was agriculture was survival. So before and around kind of specialized fields, there is this kind of field of culture, which was in fact peculiarly absent from the agenda of the COP26, and I'm hoping that COP27 might actually bring it as sort of a point in itself, rather than a kind of loose air we breathe. So at any rate, so the habit of mind that I try to address through the work that I've been doing, and general ecology is no exception. This was a project at the Serpentine that I wrote for the Serpentine as a way of tying together some of the work that the gallery was doing in the field of sustainability with a kind of a much more programmatic, much more artist-led sort of presentation of kind of artworks and commissions and so on, and to try and really think holistically about the system of a gallery, its relationship to other organizations, to other disciplines, to other fields, whilst at the same time doing kind of inner work. And one of the things that I've noticed was that more often than not, when institutions mention the word sustainability and the word resilience, particularly galleries and museums, in my experience, more often than not, they actually mean their own sustainability and their own resilience. You read it, it's not about the planet in any shape or form. It's about how do we remain sustainable, how do we remain resilient. And one of the things that has been, and I'll probably draw it to a close very soon, but one of the things that has really been concerning me has been, could we work with organizations and institutions on their sense of purpose, suggesting that if instead of ensuring the thriving and well-being of the small, be it a discipline, be it one specific institution, their senses of purpose jumped to the very far away, the very unrealistic, the thing that they can't achieve on their own, and then worked its way back. Like, what do you need to do? If your sense of purpose is over there, who do you need around you? What do you need to do? How much do you need to how much more do you need to open yourself up to get closer to that? Those are the kinds that's when the interesting questions happen. And we're so, we lose our sense of purpose all the time. The lockdown does this to us, has done this to us. The unequal distribution of the effects of climate breakdown alone, social injustice, all of those things, you lose your sense of purpose all the time. So can you make it further away from you? Can you make it larger? Can you bring that kind of movement back in? And then finally, I think one of the things that has been really fundamental to the way that I've been working has been to really think past the centrality of the human. So this kind of past what's called the anthropocentric paradigm. So it is a paradigm. It is one of the shapes in which we shape the world, the centrality of the human vis-a-vis a kind of inert, not alive, not vital kind of planet that is at our disposal for extraction, destruction, and so on. Reminding ourselves, of course, that human at the center of the anthropocentric paradigm was never all humans in the first place, because it was a paradigm that was established as a direct part of the project of colonial expansion and empire. If we remind ourselves of this, then we can think that a more than human paradigm that repractices the vitalism, the aliveness, the kind of ensoulment of everything around us is actually part and parcel of a social justice project and a decolonial project as well as an ecological one, brings again this life as a whole. What did you call it? The whole of life, or the planet, or the kind of brings the complex, the messy, the complex, the sticky, the everythingness of everything back into some kind of, even if unfocused field of emergence or something like this. If that made any sense.
That was perfect. And actually, something that you said, I think we just have a few minutes for our last question before we wrap up, but something you said, and actually everybody has invoked, is this idea of the necessity of holding these two things, the North Star, and which is the big, as you said, making it further away, but then also everything on the day-to-day to make that, and that those two things, sometimes the North Star is the excuse not to do the thing that's close at hand, I have found, but instead it needs to be the driver for the daily. And if we had more time, I would talk about incentives versus belief, and the way that we ask for change to happen, but we probably don't have time for that conversation. But I'd love to talk to you about it at some point.
There's something really interesting, though, about how do we experience the planet is a really good question. And if you look at traditions, spiritual traditions the world around, and you try and sort of think them through together, you realize that the job is to sense, is to get to grips with the sense of a complex and a planetary, but that the means through which you do that is entirely internal. So actually the most intimate and the most far are completely connected with all the mess that in the middle.
I completely agree. I love we went very existential, but also I think that's right, and we should be thinking that way. And so back to the soundbite, which inevitably we get to in panels, but I think are also really useful because people like a clarity. If I can ask each of you to have just a sentence or two, that will be very hard for some of you, but for a call to action today for the people in this room, that would be really wonderful. And then we can wrap it up. Is there time for a question or two? Okay, I'll start with you, Tino. What is your call for action?
And I want to follow on a little bit what Lucia just said, like practicing our double act. Like, I think what Lucia, what you said is like, it's in a way through terminology. If you say the anthropocentric paradigm, it's like a mindset, and it's almost like what philosophy does. Like we have certain notions which you cultivate, and they they shape the world, as you call it, right? But like maybe coming back to art and like why we have to reassess art itself, you know, and maybe find another term, is because these mindsets need to be practiced. They need to be embodied, and like art institutions were places to practice that. For example, the idea of linear time, you know, was not a given, so you needed to practice it while walking through a museum. That's one of the rationales of museums, to embody linear time, which is then important for like, for example, for banks and credits, because only if you understand linear time, do you understand the concept of the future, will you give a loan, take a loan, all of that kind of stuff. So my point is that like the kind of how our cultural formats today, and that's why we had this initiative like 10 years ago with Francesco Bandoli, like the kind of formats today, and some of the best thinkers of the 20th century, they understood that already, is they're very much subject-object related, you know, like so if you're in a theater audience, in a cinema, in a concert hall, mostly you're in a very antagonistic way, like you're sitting here, it's almost like we're about to crash into each other. Like, what are you doing there? You're like rows, you're like, and what are we doing here? We're row and we're facing each other. Like, if I face somebody, it's an antagonistic thing, and it's not a communal thing, you know? So if you look at our cultural formats, like all the kind of stage formats, they function in the subject-object thing. Also, museums, the history of installation and environments has kind of worked on that, and that's a genuine accomplishment, I think, of art. But the traditional mode is still a lot, and if you look at most of the shows here in Venice, it's like, I'm here, I'm the subject, here's the world. That's a certain mindset. From here, I'm going to kind of manipulate you, use you, exploit you, is a small step. Whereas if we create cultural formats where we're more communal, more together, more like in a circle, for example, it's very difficult to do that because, and also cultural formats which are less focused on the eye, because the eye goes into the distance. So visual art is also a problem because of the visual. You know, because the eye goes into the distance, can keep somebody in a distance, and then you can be in connection, but in distance. That's what the eye can do. The ears are much more immersive. You know, so I think that we have to really think of not what artists can do, but we have to think first of all in which cultural formats do artists do their creativity. You know, or like, and they have to be kind of recalibrated, reformulated, like you were saying with these notions, philosophical notions like anthropocentric, because they get practiced, you know, like you said with your son, like, oh, I am here, here's the world. It's a Kantian worldview. It doesn't really work, because we're on one planet, we're a species like any other, and when the planet, like the planet is going to be fine, but we're going to suffer as a species. So that's the problem.
Thank you. That's great. Heath, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I think just bearing in mind the context of this talk and the hopeful audience of the government, I think, you know, the fastest way to change is effective policy and legislation. And I think governments need to do more to legislate on ecological issues. I think in general terms, they need to urgently stop the subsidies for fossil fuel industries, obviously, and they need to incentivize the decarbonization of every sector. But in terms of our sector, I think we need government support to accelerate our transition, and that will pay back to them in the near term, I think, because if there was better funding for the arts, the artists and the institutions that use their practice and platform to address environmental issues will have a greater potential to influence the hearts and minds of audiences. And I think, you know, I hope governments understand how crucial culture is in reaching audiences on these topics. So better funding for the arts means better public engagement.
Wonderful. Lucia, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I mean, my soundbite would be a sort of message of hope, I hope, to organizations and institutions. And really, like, it comes from the bottom of my heart. Like, stop trying to survive and start trying to change. A creature that feels at risk of its own death can be the most violent creature, can destroy everything around it. Stop trying to survive. Your own sustainability and your own resilience will be much better ensured if you allow yourself that space of sticky and messy, like fragility as well.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Jan, maybe you're the last word. No one's the last word on this panel, clearly, but you can be the
No, I mean,
theoretical
you know,
last
like I just, you know, like I don't participate in these interesting questions in order to think of solutions. No, I think they're interesting questions because it reflects about how we as humans are behaving and thinking, and that's why. But that's what I'm trying to understand better. You know.
Thank you.